Isadora Vance, the ruthless cattle queen, rides to banish feared mountain man Silas Kincaid. Rifle drawn, she stalks his cabin, ready to purge the wild menace. "He will learn his place today," she snarls. But through a crack, she sees a detail so profound it shatters her iron will, revealing a stark truth about the beast. Isadora Vance, a widow whose youth had been scoured clean by the harsh winds of frontier life, commanded her vast cattle empire with an iron will and a gaze that could wither a lesser man. Her ranch, a sprawling testament to her resilience, stretched across valleys and climbed into the foothills, a domain where every blade of grass, every head of cattle, and every soul within her employ bowed to her unyielding authority. She had seen men come and go, some with promises, others with threats, and all, in the end, had faltered. This history had forged a shield around her heart, rendering it impervious to the softer emotions, leaving only the sharp edge of pragmatism and an insatiable hunger for control. The whispers from the distant towns painted Silas Kincaid as a monstrous figure, a man of raw, untamed savagery, rumored to tear flesh with his bare hands and live in a filth-ridden den. He was a relic, a vestige of a bygone era that Isadora believed had no place in the burgeoning civilization she strove to cultivate. His mere existence, a shadow lurking on the fringes of her domain, was a challenge to her dominion, an affront she could no longer tolerate. Her ascent into the high country was a silent, grim battle against the very elements that shaped the mountain man's existence. The wind, a mournful lament through the skeletal pines, whipped at her riding cloak, stinging her face with icy tendrils. Yet Isadora pushed on, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the distant, snow-capped peaks. Each gust seemed to whisper warnings of ancient spirits and unforgiving wilderness, but she dismissed them as mere sounds, her mind consumed by the impending confrontation. Her arrogance, a formidable companion on this solitary journey, pulsed through her veins. She envisioned Silas as a cornered beast, snarling in a wretched hovel, surrounded by the remnants of his barbarous existence. She saw him trapped, cowering, and utterly defeated. The landscape, breathtaking in its raw majesty, unfolded around her in a tapestry of jagged rock faces, snow-laden firs, and valleys shrouded in an ethereal mist. Yet Isadora's eyes, narrowed by purpose, perceived only obstacles to be conquered, treacherous paths to be navigated. She was blind to the stark beauty, the quiet power that emanated from every gnarled tree and silent stone. Her quest was not merely to remove a man from her land, but to make an undeniable statement, that the unyielding order of law and the undeniable power of wealth would always prevail over the primitive, chaotic law of survival that Silas Kincaid embodied. This journey was a testament to her own unflappable will, a pilgrimage of dominance. But as her horse's hooves crunched through the fresh powder, leaving trails that would soon be swallowed by the next snowfall, an almost imperceptible shift occurred in the air. The silence of the peaks was not merely the absence of sound, it was a profound, watchful presence, as if the ancient stones themselves held secrets far older and deeper than any human dispute. A faint, almost ghost-like scent of wood smoke mingled with something earthy and unfamiliar, drifted on the frigid air, hinting at a life lived with a different kind of wisdom, a stark contrast to the rough, bloody imagery that filled Isadora's hardened imagination. It was a premonition, a subtle discord in the symphony of her expectations, a suggestion that the mountain harbored truths her civilized world had long forgotten or willfully ignored. Reaching the secluded plateau, where the mountain man's cabin, a crude but resilient structure, clung precariously to the rocky ledge, Isadora dismounted, her movements precise and deliberate. Her Winchester rifle, now in her grip, felt like an extension of her own formidable will. She moved through the sparse stand of pines, each step measured, intent on catching her quarry unawares, ready to deliver her final, crushing decree. The air crackled with a tension that mirrored the tautness in her own chest, the world itself seeming to brace for the inevitable clash between civilization's queen and the silent king of the wild. Her eyes, filled with grim determination, found the small, hide-covered window of the cabin. and as she peered through the narrow gap, the very breath seemed to catch in the frigid mountain air, poised on the precipice of an unimaginable revelation. Her horse, a magnificent beast of iron gray, exhaled plumes of vapor into the frozen air as Isadora dismounted. The soft crunch of its hooves on the fresh snow, a stark contrast to the thunderous beating of her own heart. The rifle felt cold and familiar in her gloved hands, its weight a comforting anchor in the vast, silent wilderness. Every sinew in her body was taut, coiled for the confrontation she had envisioned countless times in the long, lonely nights at her ranch. She had come prepared, not just with a firearm, but with a resolve forged in the crucible of a life that had taught her to trust only herself and the unyielding power of her will. The journey up the mountain had been a crucible, stripping away the comforts of her refined world, leaving only the raw essence of her determination. The biting wind had not deterred her, nor the treacherous footing. Instead, each obstacle overcome had fueled her certainty, solidifying her belief that she was destined to impose order upon this wild, untamed corner of her dominion. She was the harbinger of a new era, one where the law of the land, backed by deed and by steel, would finally conquer the primitive code of the mountains. As she moved stealthily between the towering pines, their branches laden with snow like stoic sentinels, the expected stench of unwashed hides and raw meat was conspicuously absent. Instead, a faint aroma, delicate and unfamiliar, began to weave through the frigid air. It was a subtle blend of dry wood smoke, not acrid or suffocating, but warm and inviting, mingled with the earthy scent of dried herbs, perhaps pine needles or sage. This unexpected fragrance, so contrary to the foul odors she had anticipated, pricked at the edges of her resolute focus, a tiny fissure in the carefully constructed fortress of her expectations. She approached the crude log cabin, a structure that appeared to have grown organically from the mountainside itself, camouflaged by its very simplicity. It was not the dilapidated hovel she had pictured, but a sturdy, well-maintained shelter, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney, a beacon of persistent life in the desolate expanse. Her steps grew softer, more hesitant, as the incongruity between her mental image and the reality before her deepened. This was not the den of a brute, but a place imbued with a certain quiet dignity, a sanctuary carved out by hands that understood the mountain's whims. With the rifle held firmly against her shoulder, its cold steel pressing against the thick fabric of her coat, Isadora edged closer to the small window, a rough opening covered by a stretched animal hide. Her breath hitched in her throat, a small puff of white in the crisp air. She steadied herself, preparing for the sight of the wildman, perhaps sharpening a hunting knife or cleaning a bloodied pelt, fulfilling the dark legends that preceded him. Her finger hovered near the trigger, ready to assert her dominion, to shatter the quiet with the brutal finality of her purpose. The mountain seemed to hold its breath, a silent, ancient witness to the impending clash of worlds. But through a narrow slit in the hide, where a thin beam of firelight escaped, a sight greeted her eyes that froze her in place, rendering her weapon suddenly heavy, a dead weight in her trembling hands. The cabin's interior was not a scene of savagery, but one of unexpected, almost startling warmth. A low, steady fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows upon the rough-hewn walls. There were shelves, neatly arranged, holding various jars and dried plants, not scattered in disarray but placed with purpose. A well-worn blanket lay folded over a simple wooden bench, and the faint, sweet smell of something baking, perhaps bread, drifted from a pot simmering gently over the flames. It was not the squalor she had imagined, but an organized, almost cared-for space, a haven built not just for survival, but for living. The harsh edges of her preconceived notions began to soften, then fracture. This was not the lair of a monster, but the quiet retreat of a man who understood the rhythms of the earth, who found solace in its solitude. Her carefully constructed narrative of the savage mountain man began to unravel, replaced by a growing unease, a gnawing uncertainty that was far more unsettling than any fear. The silence within the cabin was profound, broken only by the soft, rhythmic crackle of the fire and a sound so utterly unexpected, so profoundly out of place, that Isadora's heart leaped in her chest. It was a low, melodic hum, a soft, guttural murmur that seemed to resonate with a deep, forgotten tenderness. Not a growl, not a threat, but a sound of comfort, of gentle reassurance, a sound that spoke of a different kind of strength, one far removed from the brutal power she had anticipated. Her mind reeled, attempting to reconcile the whispers of the townsfolk, the tales of a ruthless, solitary brute, with the undeniable evidence of warmth, order, and this astonishing, tender sound. The rifle, once an emblem of her authority, now felt like a cruel deception, a tool of judgment poised to strike at something she did not yet comprehend. Her fingers tightened, then loosened, around its stock. Her breath caught, held captive in her chest, as she strained to see more, to understand the source of that astonishing, lulling sound. The very core of her being, the hard shell she had cultivated over years of disappointment and betrayal, began to crack, challenged by a reality so utterly contrary to her expectations. Her world, so rigidly defined, was poised on the brink of shattering. For within that humble cabin, a truth far more complex and profoundly human awaited her gaze. The scene that unfolded beyond the rough-hewn window of Silas Kincaid's cabin was a silent detonation, shattering every hardened conviction Isadora Vance had ever held. Inside, bathed in the amber glow of the hearth, the man known as the Bear sat on a weathered tree stump, his immense frame curved with an almost impossible delicacy. He was not sharpening blades nor cleaning pelts, nor engaging in any act of the brutish violence she had so readily imagined. Instead, cradled in his massive, scarred arms, was a newborn infant, a tiny bundle of fragile life. Isadora felt the cold hand of shock grip her, stilling her breath and making the blood rush from her face. Her rifle, once a symbol of her righteous indignation, now felt like an obscene intrusion, a heavy, cold testament to her monumental error. Silas, the feared recluse, the beast of the mountains, was murmuring soft, deep sounds, ancient lullabies, perhaps, to the child. His thick, calloused fingers, which she had pictured wielding an axe with merciless force, now gently guided a piece of cloth soaked in goat's milk to the baby's lips. The tenderness in his movements was startling, utterly at odds with the terrifying legends that had preceded him. This was not the monster she had come to evict. This was a guardian, a protector, transforming his formidable strength into an improbable cradle for a life so vulnerable. The air thickened with unspoken truths, with the profound irony of the situation. The civilized woman, armed and ready to condemn, stood outside, a harbinger of destruction. Inside, the wild man, feared and ostracized, cradled and nurtured a life that had no other claim, no other hope, in this vast, unforgiving wilderness. The stark dichotomy was a physical blow, a shame that burned deeper than the mountain's chill. She retreated, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, her mind struggling to process the seismic shift in her understanding. The cold, logical world she inhabited, where every action had a clear, measurable outcome, had collided with an unexpected, raw humanity that defied all her calculations. She had seen the true wealth of compassion, a treasure far more precious than any deed to land or any vault filled with gold. The man she had come to destroy was, in that moment, more human than any man she had ever known. Days later, her initial shock having settled into a persistent, unsettling hum, Isadora found herself drawn back to the treacherous mountain paths. This time, she rode not with a rifle but with a pack-horse laden with supplies. Her journey was cloaked in secrecy, a covert operation to rectify her own judgment, a penance she could not articulate, even to herself. She left the anonymous bundles, warm wool blankets, sacks of dried fruit and oats, cured meat, and a small, precious flask of potent medicine for the baby's inevitable ailments, at the foot of the winding trail that led to Silas's cabin. She left no note, no trace of her identity, only the quiet offering of sustenance, an unspoken apology for her misplaced arrogance. The act was both a balm and a torment, It soothed the gnawing shame, yet reinforced the chasm between her former self and the woman she was becoming. She imagined Silas, the solitary giant, discovering the provisions, his eyes, which she had seen filled with such tenderness, now perhaps clouded with a wary curiosity. She wondered if he would suspect, if he would know, that the cattle queen was now engaged in an act of clandestine charity, compelled by a vision that had undone her very soul. The arrival of the new supplies was indeed met with Silas's characteristic wariness. He observed the bundles from the cover of the pines for a full day, his keen eyes scanning the distant slopes for any sign of a lurking presence. He was a creature of the mountain, instinctually cautious, understanding that nothing was ever truly given without an unseen cost. Yet the baby, whose name he had tentatively chosen as Lily, after a rare and resilient mountain flower, had grown stronger with the goat's milk and the warmth of his cabin. But winter was deepening, and resources were dwindling. Necessity, a stern mistress in the mountains, finally drove him forward. He approached the packages with a hunter's caution, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. His rough fingers untied the knots, revealing the unexpected bounty. A frown creased his brow. He recognized the quality of the goods, not common frontier fare, but items of significant value, clearly from a well-established ranch. His gaze swept over the distant valley, a vast expanse of land that belonged to one formidable woman. He knew of Isadora Vance, her reputation as fierce and unyielding. The implication of her potential involvement, however remote, was a riddle etched in the fresh snow. He returned to his cabin, the heavy bundles slung over his shoulder. A new weight settled upon him beyond their physical mass. The provisions were a godsend, a lifeline for Lily, but they came with an unspoken obligation, a silent question mark hanging in the frigid air. He had carved out his life in solitude, dependent on no one, accepting no charity. Now a fragile life depended on him, and that dependence, in turn, hinged upon this mysterious benefactor. One frigid morning, months after the initial encounter, a desperate wail echoed from the cabin. Lily was consumed by a fever, her tiny body hot to the touch, her breathing shallow and ragged. Silas, usually a man of stoic resolve, was gripped by a terror he hadn't known since his own youth. He had exhausted his meager supply of remedies, tried every herb and poultice known to him, but the fever raged. His isolation, once a source of strength, now became a suffocating prison. He watched the child, his heart a raw, exposed nerve, knowing that without proper medicine, Lily would not see the spring. The thought of losing her, of failing this tiny, trusting soul, was more agonizing than any wound he had ever sustained. He knew, deep in his bones, that his last, desperate hope lay with the very world he had shunned. The cattle queen possessed the resources, the knowledge of medicines, the connections to the distant towns. But to seek her help meant confronting his own solitude, exposing his vulnerability, and facing the woman who, for reasons he could not fathom, had chosen to leave him these anonymous gifts. It meant stepping from the shadows, a momentous decision for a man who had built his life on retreating from the world. He was a man of the wild, and she, the queen of civilization. The thought of venturing into her domain, of asking for anything, was an affront to his very being. Yet the tiny, gasping breaths of the child forced his hand. He would go, not for himself, but for the fragile life now utterly dependent on his fierce, protective love. The cold mountain wind seemed to carry a whispered condition. The baby's survival would demand a price far greater than any he had ever paid. The mountain man descended, a silent, formidable shadow against the snow-laden landscape, carrying the small, feverish bundle of Lily wrapped securely in his arms. His face, usually a mask of rugged stoicism, was etched with a grim desperation. His eyes, typically sharp and discerning, now clouded with a raw, paternal fear. Each step down the treacherous, winding path was a battle, not against the elements, but against his own deeply ingrained aversion to the world below, the world of people and judgment. He was venturing into the heart of what he considered a perilous, unpredictable wilderness, society itself. all for the sake of the fragile life nestled against his chest. The journey was a blur of icy wind and relentless snow, a testament to his unbreakable will. He navigated the familiar trails with a hunter's precision, his senses acutely aware of every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, yet his mind was consumed by the child's shallow breaths and the searing heat of her tiny forehead against his cheek. He had faced bears and blizzards, outlaws and starvation, but this, the silent, relentless siege of illness on a helpless infant, was a new, terrifying adversary. He was ill-equipped to fight alone. As he drew closer to the valley, the scent of wood smoke grew stronger, no longer the clean, resinous scent of his own hearth, but mingled with the telltale odors of human habitation, livestock, cured leather, and something undefinable, a pervasive scent of many lives intertwined. He saw the faint glow of lamps in the distance, a cluster of flickering lights against the encroaching twilight, each one a beacon of the civilization he had so carefully avoided. The expansive spread of the Vance Ranch, a veritable fortress of wealth and order, loomed larger with every arduous step. Silas reached the outskirts of the ranch under the cloak of deep twilight, a silent specter emerging from the wilderness. He moved with a practiced stealth, using the cover of barns and corrals, until he reached the main house. It was a grand structure built of sturdy timber and stone, radiating a warmth and solidity that spoke of prosperity and permanence. He hesitated at the edge of the lamplight, a giant of the wild, out of place in this tableau of human endeavor. The sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint murmur of voices, were a cacophony to his ears, a stark contrast to the profound silence of his mountain home. Taking a deep, bracing breath, steeling himself against the wave of unfamiliarity that threatened to overwhelm him, Silas stepped into the light. He approached the main door, his fist, usually so adept at felling trees, now hesitated, an unfamiliar tremor running through his arm. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing a stout, formidable ranch hand, who stiffened at the sight of the wild, unkempt figure standing on the porch. The man's hand immediately went to the pistol at his hip. "State your business, stranger," the ranch hand growled, his voice thick with suspicion. Silas, unused to speaking in this world, struggled to find the words, his throat tight with a mixture of pride and desperation. "I need to see the Queen," he rasped, his voice raw, unpracticed in polite requests. He gestured vaguely at the bundled child in his arms, a silent, eloquent plea. The ranch hand's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from Silas's imposing figure to the small, tightly wrapped bundle, a spark of confusion momentarily eclipsing his suspicion. The altercation drew the attention of others inside. Isadora Vance herself appeared at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the hallway. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately fell upon the wild man. Recognition, swift and undeniable, flickered within them. The memory of her secret journey up the mountain, the shocking revelation in his cabin, the anonymous offerings she had left, all converged in that single, charged moment. She saw not the beast from the legends, but the protective father she had witnessed, now humbled by desperation. Her gaze then dropped to the bundle in his arms, and a wave of profound understanding mingled with an unexpected surge of fear for the child, washed over her. The gravity of his presence here, on her doorstep, spoke volumes. This was not a challenge, not an act of aggression, but a desperate plea for help. The man who scorned civilization had brought his most precious vulnerability to her, the queen of that very world. Without a word, a silent, potent understanding passing between them, Isadora stepped forward, gently pushing the ranch hand aside. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, was softened by an unspoken empathy. "Bring him inside carefully," she instructed the now bewildered ranch hand, her eyes never leaving Silas. "Prepare the infirmary, and tell cook to bring warm milk and a light broth, quickly." Silas, still wary, hesitated, his eyes searching hers for any sign of betrayal or trickery. He was a predator brought into a den of foxes, his instincts screaming caution. But the flicker of genuine concern in Isadora's gaze, The way her eyes kept darting to the ailing infant, a mirror of his own consuming fear, offered a fragile, unspoken promise of sanctuary. He knew that by entering her home, he was stepping into a world utterly alien to him, a world governed by rules he did not understand. He had chosen to trust, driven by the purest form of love a parent could feel, surrendering his cherished isolation for the faint hope of saving Lily. He crossed the threshold, the warmth of the ranch house enveloping him, a stark contrast to the icy mountain wind that still clung to his rough clothes, a testament to the monumental gamble he had just taken. The air within the infirmary of the Vance Ranch crackled with a silent, agonizing tension. Silas, stripped of his rough furs and seated awkwardly on a stool by the small cot, watched with an intensity that bordered on a physical ache as Isadora, with the practiced efficiency of one accustomed to crises, ministered to Lily. Her hands, usually firm and decisive in signing documents or issuing orders, were now remarkably gentle as she pressed a cool cloth to the baby's fevered brow and carefully spooned small drops of bitter medicine into her mouth. She worked with a quiet competence, consulting a worn medical book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Silas, a man who had faced down grizzlies with only a knife, felt utterly helpless. His strength, his knowledge of the wild, everything that made him formidable in his own domain, was useless against this invisible enemy that ravaged the tiny, fragile body of the child he had come to love. He saw Isadora in a new light, not as the haughty cattle queen of rumor, but as a woman capable of profound care, her demeanor softened by the urgency of the moment. The contrast between her powerful public persona and this quiet, compassionate act was a revelation, shattering yet another layer of his preconceived notions. Days turned into a grueling vigil. The ranch hands, usually bustling with activity, moved with hushed reverence, their whispers conveying their deep concern for the tiny patient and the imposing, silent mountain man who kept watch. They knew Isadora well enough to understand that when she dedicated herself to a cause, she did so with unwavering focus. The image of their formidable boss, kneeling beside a cot, spoon-feeding a feverish infant while a wildman watched with desperate hope, became a silent legend spreading through the ranch, slowly reshaping their understanding of their own world. One particularly dark night, as a blizzard raged outside, rattling the windows and howling like a hungry wolf, Lily's condition worsened dramatically. Her breathing grew shallow, her tiny body convulsing with the intensity of the fever. A cold dread, far more terrifying than any mountain storm, gripped Silas. He rose, his massive frame trembling, and reached for the child, a primal instinct to shield her overwhelming him. But Isadora, her face pale but resolute, gently intercepted him. "She needs this," Isadora said, her voice strained but firm, as she began to prepare a crude, steaming poultice of crushed herbs. The ancient mountain remedies Silas himself understood, yet mixed with frontier knowledge beyond his ken. "Her lungs are seizing. We must break the fever, or she will not last the night." She pressed the warm, pungent poultice to Lily's chest, then wrapped the baby tightly, her movements swift and precise. For hours they sat in agonizing silence, Isadora meticulously checking the child's breathing, Silas staring into the flickering flame of the oil lamp, his heart a prayer. The blizzard raged, mirroring the storm within the small room. Then, as dawn began to paint the sky with faint streaks of gray, a miracle occurred. Lily's breathing deepened, the convulsions ceased, and the searing heat of her skin gradually began to subside. A collective sigh of relief, unspoken yet palpable, filled the room. Silas felt a tremor run through his powerful body, the release of tension so profound it almost buckled his knees. He looked at Isadora, his eyes, usually so guarded, now overflowing with a gratitude so raw, so utterly without artifice, that it brought a flush to her own cheeks. For the first time, he saw her not as an adversary, but as a life-giver, a healer, a partner in the most profound act of protection. As Lily finally drifted into a peaceful, healing sleep, the storm outside also began to wane, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white. The tension in the infirmary slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet exhaustion and an unexpected intimacy. Isadora, sinking onto a nearby chair, looked at Silas, her gaze softer than he had ever imagined it could be. "She will live," Isadora murmured, her voice laced with an emotion Silas couldn't quite decipher. "You saved her by bringing her here." Silas, still overwhelmed by the narrow escape, nodded slowly. "And you brought her back." He paused, then, the words tumbling out, raw and unpracticed. I lost my own once, my woman and our child. The fever took them both years ago in the spring melt. I couldn't save them. That's why I went to the mountain to be alone." His voice, rough and deep, cracked with the ancient pain, a wound he had carried in solitary silence for so long. Isadora listened, her own eyes widening slightly. The bear was revealing a vulnerability, a grief so profound it explained the very core of his isolation. Her own past, a landscape of betrayal and loss, suddenly resonated with his. She remembered her late husband, a man who had squandered her family's fortune and left her a widow burdened with debt and a hardened heart. She had built her empire on the ashes of that heartbreak, vowing never to be vulnerable again. "I understand," Isadora finally said, her voice barely a whisper, an admission that surprised even herself. "The world, it can be cruel. It takes what it wants, and leaves us to pick up the pieces." A long, comfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping child. In that moment, a profound bond was forged, not of romance or alliance, but of shared trauma, of two hardened souls who had found an unexpected mirror in each other's grief. They were both outcasts in their own ways, survivors in a world that sought to break them, now united by the fragile life they had saved together. Their partnership, born of desperation and forged in the crucible of a child's near death, had sealed a silent pact of mutual understanding, transforming two solitary figures into a nascent, improbable family. The unspoken truth was that Isadora had saved the man, as much as she had saved the child, bringing him back from the precipice of his own desolate grief. In the weeks that followed Lily's miraculous recovery, a quiet transformation began to settle over the Vance ranch, subtly reshaping the lives of Isadora and Silas. The ranch infirmary, once a place of tense vigil, became a haven of shared routines. Isadora, with her formidable organizational skills, streamlined Lily's care, ensuring a steady supply of fresh milk, soft clothes, and the gentle tonics needed for her full recovery. Silas, in turn, discovered a profound, unspoken comfort in the rhythm of the ranch, a stark contrast to the stark solitude of his mountain life. He helped with chores, his immense strength invaluable in tasks that strained lesser men, yet always, his eyes returned to Lily, a silent sentinel by her side. They spent countless hours together, often in comfortable silence, watching Lily sleep or feeding her small spoonfuls of broth. Isadora found herself sharing stories of her own harsh youth, of the struggles she endured to build her empire, of the bitter lessons learned from a world that took without mercy. Silas, in turn, spoke of the mountain's wisdom, of the language of the wind and the snow, of the delicate balance of life and death in the wilderness, and of the profound peace he found in its embrace. Their conversations were not of grand pronouncements, but of shared vulnerabilities, of two souls, once fiercely solitary, slowly finding solace in each other's presence. The laughter of Lily, a bright, clear bell, began to fill the ranch house, chasing away the lingering shadows of their individual pasts. Their connection deepened through shared responsibility. One crisp morning, as they watched Lily cooing contentedly in her makeshift cradle near the warm kitchen hearth, Isadora confessed a fear that had long haunted her. "This ranch," she began, her gaze distant, "it's all I have, but it's also a constant battle. The boundaries are always contested, the winter unforgiving, the men untrustworthy. I carry the weight of it all, always alone." She spoke of the encroaching lumber companies, the ruthless cattle barons from the south, all eyeing her vast, fertile lands. Silas listened, his deep eyes observing her, seeing beyond the formidable exterior to the weary woman beneath. He understood the relentless pressure of survival, the constant vigilance against threats, both seen and unseen. "The mountain teaches you to read the signs," he rumbled, his voice a low comfort. "To know when the storm is coming and to prepare. To fight when you must, but also to build, strong and true, against the harshest winds." His words, simple and profound, resonated with her. He offered not pity, but understanding, a shared strength. One evening, as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, Isadora found Silas meticulously carving a small wooden bear, its features softened, its paws clutching a tiny, almost invisible blossom. It was a gift for Lily, a symbol of protection and new life. As he finished, his rough hands paused, his gaze fixed on the miniature sculpture. "My grandmother," he began, his voice surprisingly soft. "She told me stories of an old medicine woman, a healer who lived generations ago in these very mountains. She knew every herb, every root, every secret of the land. They said her spirit still watches over those who protect the vulnerable." Isadora's breath hitched. "My own grandmother," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "She was renowned for her knowledge of herbs and healing. She left me a small, leather-bound journal, filled with her remedies and tinctures. My mother scorned it as witchcraft, but I always kept it close." She paused, a startling realization dawning upon her. She spoke of a secret mountain spring, known only to a select few, said to hold remarkable healing properties, a spring that had been known by my lineage, and perhaps yours. A silent, potent moment passed between them. The old medicine woman of Silas's tales, the healing spring of Isadora's ancestors, their destinies, it seemed, had been subtly intertwined long before their paths had ever crossed. It was as if the very mountains had orchestrated their meeting, guiding two solitary souls, each carrying a fragment of an ancient, forgotten legacy, towards a shared purpose. The revelation strengthened their bond, weaving a thread of predestination into the tapestry of their burgeoning, unusual family. The days continued to unfold with a newfound rhythm, a quiet harmony settling over the ranch. Lily thrived, her small cries replaced by gurgles of delight, her frail body growing stronger with each passing week. Silas, once a ghost of the wild, now moved with a purpose within the ranch, his presence a grounding force for Isadora. Their found family, an unlikely trio of a formidable rancher, a reclusive mountain man, and a rescued infant, had found a fragile peace. But the mountains, as Silas well knew, never stayed peaceful for long. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a distant ominous plume of smoke stained the horizon. It was too dense, too dark to be a natural fire, and it was moving with an alarming speed towards the valley. A ranch hand, his face pale with fear, galloped towards the main house, his horse lathered with sweat, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Madam Vance," he cried, his words swallowed by the rising wind. "Horsemen, many of them. They're burning the north pasture, driving the herd." The fragile peace shattered, replaced by the stark reality of the untamed frontier. The world, it seemed, would not allow them to simply exist in their newfound harmony. The shadow of an old enemy, or perhaps a new one, had returned to reclaim its due. The plume of smoke, a dark, malevolent stain against the vibrant Montana sunset, was a brutal herald of the returning threat. Isadora Vance, her face hardening into the familiar mask of the cattle queen, watched from her porch as the ranch hand, breathless and panicked, delivered his grim report. "They're burning the north pasture, Madam Vance, driving the herd." His words, laced with terror, confirmed her deepest fears. The fragile peace they had cultivated, the burgeoning sense of belonging, was now under direct assault. Silas, standing beside her, felt the primal stirrings of alarm. His years in the mountains had taught him to recognize the signs of approaching danger, And this was no mere bandit raid. The methodical burning of pasture land, the organized herding, this spoke of a calculated, relentless foe, one with clear intentions to cripple her empire. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his hunting knife, his eyes scanning the horizon, already assessing defensive positions. "Lumber barons," Isadora growled, her voice tight with fury. "Or perhaps the railroad men. They want this land, Silas, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." Her heart hammered with a familiar rage. This was the same kind of avarice, the same relentless greed that had once brought her to the brink of ruin. But this time, she was not alone. She looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, oblivious to the encroaching darkness, and a fierce protective fire ignited within her. She was no longer just defending her empire. She was defending her family, the one she had unknowingly built with the wild man and the orphaned child. The first few days were a blur of defensive preparations. Silas, with his innate understanding of terrain and strategy, proved invaluable. He scouted the perimeters, set up early warning systems, and trained the ranch hands, transforming their fear into a semblance of discipline. Isadora, leading with characteristic authority, organized patrols, fortified choke points, and rallied her people. The ranch became a fortress, every man and woman grimly determined to protect what was theirs. But the attackers, a shadowy force of mercenaries and hired guns, were relentless. They did not engage in direct confrontation, but employed guerrilla tactics, small, swift raids, sabotage, and psychological warfare designed to wear down the ranch's defenses. Water sources were poisoned, fences cut, and ominous messages nailed to trees, threatening worse if Isadora did not relinquish her claims. The tension was a constant suffocating weight, pressing down on everyone. One night, under a moonless sky, Silas returned from a scouting mission, his face grim. "They're not after the land, not directly," he rumbled, his voice low, pulling Isadora into the shadows of the main barn. "They're after you, Queen, or what you represent." He had found a crude map left deliberately near a poisoned spring. It depicted not the ranch's boundaries, but a specific route leading to a remote, mineral-rich vein deep within the mountain territory, far beyond the ranch lands. And marked clearly on the map was a symbol, an ancient, almost forgotten glyph, similar to one Isadora had seen sketched in her grandmother's journal, a sign of the healing spring. "This is not about the ranch," Silas continued, his voice heavy with a terrible realization. "They are after the secrets of the mountain, the legacy of your ancestors, the healing spring. They know of its power, Isadora, and they believe you hold the key." The implication hung heavy in the air. Her grandmother's healing knowledge, the shared lineage, the very things that had drawn her and Silas together, were now the target of this ruthless enemy. The true motive, more insidious and dangerous than mere land grabbing, had been revealed. The threat escalated quickly. A chilling message arrived, delivered by a riderless horse with a black ribbon tied to its bridle, a symbol of mourning. It stated that unless Isadora presented herself at the old abandoned mine shaft at dawn, all of her cattle and every soul on her ranch would perish in a final, devastating fire. The choice was clear: surrender herself or watch her world burn. Isadora felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, but her resolve was unwavering. She was the leader, the queen, and she would protect her people. She would face them, alone if necessary. She began to formulate a desperate plan, one that would put her in mortal danger, but might save her ranch and the new family she cherished. Silas, however, saw the unspoken sacrifice in her eyes. He knew her now, knew the fierce protective core that drove her. As she prepared to leave, donning her riding duster and checking the load in her rifle, he stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking the doorway. His eyes, usually so impassive, burned with a fierce protective fire. "You will not go alone," he stated, his voice a low growl, an unyielding declaration. "If they seek the key, they will find it only through me. For I am of this mountain, and its secrets are etched in my bones." "And Lily," he added, his voice softening, Glancing at the sleeping child, she needs her mother, not a martyr. He made his own choice, an act of self-sacrifice born of his newfound love and loyalty. He would offer himself, using his knowledge of the mountain, to draw the enemy away, to buy time for Isadora and the ranch. He would become the decoy, the bait, a single formidable target in the vast wilderness. He would lead them away from the valley, into the treacherous, unforgiving terrain he knew so intimately, turning his own sanctuary into a deadly trap for their pursuers. Isadora's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of terror and profound gratitude. She understood the true cost of his offer, the deadly gamble he was about to take, not for land or fortune, but for the fragile found family he had come to protect. The mountain, a silent witness to their plight, now braced itself for the imminent clash. The dawn broke with a cold, unforgiving gray, mirroring the grim resolve etched on Silas Kincaid's face. He stood on the porch of the Vance ranch house, a solitary figure against the vast, unforgiving landscape, prepared to face an enemy that sought to unravel the very fabric of his newfound existence. He had exchanged his heavy furs for a lighter, more agile buckskin, better suited for the swift, evasive movements he planned. His hunting knife was sheathed, his rifle loaded, and his heart, though heavy with the weight of sacrifice, beat with a fierce, protective rhythm. Isadora watched him, her hand pressed against the cold wood of the doorframe, a silent sentinel of fear and profound admiration. She wanted to protest, to argue, but the look in his eyes, the unwavering determination, silenced her. He was a force of nature, untamable, utterly dedicated to the survival of his chosen family. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was his way of protecting them, of honoring the unspoken bond they had forged. With a final lingering glance at the sleeping ranch house, at the small window where Lily lay, Silas vanished into the pre-dawn gloom, melting into the winding trails that led up into the mountains. He was the mountain man, returning to his domain, but this time he was not seeking solitude. He was becoming a lure, a phantom in the snow, drawing the ruthless pursuers away from the vulnerable ranch. The confrontation began not with a roar, but with a silent, deadly game of cat and mouse. Silas led the enemy, a band of hardened mercenaries led by a cold, calculating man known only as the Carver. Deep into the treacherous high country, he used every trick known to him. False trails, rock falls triggered at precise moments, the blinding glare of the morning sun reflecting off snow, and the sudden, disorienting cries of predatory birds he mimicked perfectly. He moved like a ghost, appearing and disappearing, a frustrating, terrifying enigma to his pursuers. The Carver, a man whose reputation for brutality preceded him, was infuriated by Silas's evasiveness. He wanted the mountain man alive, believing Silas held the true key to the ancient healing spring, a prize he intended to exploit for immense wealth. But Silas, with his intimate knowledge of every crevice and hidden path, systematically thinned their ranks, one by one, with silent arrows and swift, decisive strikes from his knife. He did not revel in the violence, but executed it with a cold, necessary efficiency, each action a testament to his unbreakable will to protect. The climax of their pursuit brought them to a narrow, ice-slicked ravine, a place of ancient, crumbling rock and treacherous footing. Silas, cornered but unbowed, faced the Carver and his remaining men. The Carver, his face contorted in a sneer of triumph, advanced, a wicked, serrated blade glinting in his hand. "The mountain secrets are mine, old man," he spat, his voice echoing off the frozen walls. "Tell me where the spring lies, and your death will be swift." But Silas merely smiled, a grim, humorless curve of his lips. "The mountain shares its secrets only with those who respect it," he rumbled, his voice low but powerful. "Not with scavengers like you." Just as the Carver lunged, a sudden, blinding white flash erupted from the ridge above. Isadora, having followed Silas's trail with a small, loyal band of ranch hands, had anticipated his strategy. She had positioned her men, each carrying a mirror, on the highest points, reflecting the intense morning sun directly into the eyes of the enemy. Disoriented and momentarily blinded, the carver stumbled, his attack faltering. Silas seized the moment. He moved with the speed of a charging bear, not to kill, but to disarm. His massive hand locked onto the carver's wrist, twisting the blade away. Then, with a powerful heave, he threw the man against the icy rock face. Before the carver could recover, Silas pinned him, not with a killing blow, but with a surprising act of calculated mercy. He pressed the sharp edge of his own knife against the carver's throat, close enough to draw a bead of blood, but not to sever. "The mountain has a long memory," Silas whispered, his voice dangerously low. "You will forget its secrets, or it will claim you. Leave this place. Never return." The carver, disarmed and utterly defeated, stared into Silas's eyes, seeing not savagery, but an ancient, formidable wisdom. He saw the truth of the mountain's power channeled through this man. The remaining mercenaries, witnessing their leader's unexpected capitulation, dropped their weapons, their will to fight broken. Isadora and her ranch hands descended, their rifles ready, but the battle was over. The combined strength of the mountain man's wilderness cunning and the rancher's strategic brilliance had triumphed. Yet, as the last of the carver's men were disarmed and sent fleeing, the victory felt bittersweet. The mountains, in their silent wisdom, seemed to offer a warning. The carver himself, humiliated but alive, vanished into the distant pines. He was defeated but not broken, and the memory of his avarice, the hunger for the mountain's secrets, lingered like a faint poisonous vapor on the crisp morning air. Silas looked at Isadora, a silent understanding passing between them. The immediate threat was gone, but the world remained a dangerous place, and their watch, they knew, had only just begun. The peace they had fought for was not an endpoint, but a fragile, hard-won beginning. A year had passed since the climactic confrontation in the ice-slicked ravine, and the Montana mountains, once a canvas of silent struggle, now echoed with the gentle rhythms of a thriving, unexpected family. The Vance Ranch, no longer just a stronghold of industry, had become a true home, its sturdy walls resounding with the laughter of a child and the quiet comfort of two souls intertwined. Isadora Vance, once the solitary cattle queen, now walked with a softness in her stride, her formidable gaze softened by the profound contentment she had found. Her empire remained, but it was no longer merely a testament to her hardened will. It was a sanctuary, protected by love and loyalty. Silas Kincaid, the fearsome mountain man, no longer a reclusive shadow, was a constant grounding presence. He had moved into a small, sturdy cabin built adjacent to the main ranch house, a bridge between his wild past and his settled present. He still ventured into the high country, his connection to the wilderness undimmed, but he always returned, drawn by the warmth of his new home, the sound of Lily's voice and the quiet companionship of Isadora. His rough hands, once adept at carving survival, now crafted intricate wooden toys for Lily, each one imbued with the silent stories of the mountain. One golden autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned to fiery hues, Isadora sat on the porch swing, Lily nestled in her lap, her small hands clutching a carved bear. Isadora was visibly pregnant, her condition a blossoming symbol of the complete healing and profound future they had built together. The child within her, a new life growing in the warmth of their shared love, was the ultimate testament to the impossible journey they had undertaken. The scar on her heart, once a jagged wound, had finally closed, leaving behind a faint, almost invisible trace, a reminder of the trials overcome. Silas emerged from the new cabin, carrying a basket of freshly picked berries, his eyes, usually so wary, now alight with a gentle peace. He sat beside them, his large hand resting protectively on Isadora's swelling belly, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle unfolding within her. The air was filled with the sweet scent of drying hay, the distant lowing of cattle, and the contented hum of a world at peace. This was the new normal, a life built on vulnerability, trust, and the fierce, unyielding love of a found family. A revelation, subtle yet profound, began to unfold in the quiet moments they shared. Isadora, continuing her grandmother's tradition, had begun to pore over the worn journal, discovering not just herbal remedies, but ancient maps and cryptic poems that spoke of the mountain's deepest secrets. She found references to a sacred grove, protected by generations of guardians, where the legendary healing spring was said to flow. As she deciphered the clues, a chilling realization emerged. The old maps, overlaid with the modern ranch boundaries, showed that the heart of that sacred grove, the true source of the spring, lay hidden not in the treacherous high peaks, but beneath the very land where the Vance ranch house now stood. The very ground Isadora had fought so fiercely to protect held the ancient secret, a legacy she had inherited by blood, and a secret Silas's ancestors, the mountain's original inhabitants, had sworn to protect. The true connection between their families, far more ancient and deeply entwined than they had ever imagined, was now undeniable. The land itself had called them together, two disparate souls, each carrying a piece of the same forgotten puzzle, destined to rediscover and protect its profound legacy. The carver and his ilk had sought power in the wrong places, chasing legends on the surface, never understanding that the true source of healing, of life, lay hidden beneath the very foundations of their own new home. The story of Isadora Vance, the Cattle Queen, and Silas Kincaid, the Mountain Man, became more than just a tale of survival. It became a legend whispered around campfires, a testament to the transformative power of unexpected love and profound sacrifice. Their union, unconventional and deeply rooted in the wild heart of Montana, solidified into a legacy that would echo through generations. The true strength, the mountains knew, was not found in solitary endurance but in the courage to open one's heart to another. The fiercest battles were not fought with guns and steel, but with vulnerability and unwavering protection. The family they had forged, two outcasts and a tiny orphan, proved that home was never merely a place, a patch of land, or a grand house. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant belonging woven from shared pain, mutual healing, and the silent, enduring promise of a future built on love. For in the relentless, beautiful wilderness they had found their most precious treasure, not gold or power, but the profound, boundless humanity that transforms isolated survival into a shared, vibrant life. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel